So again, I'd like to thank Professor Jin'gangding and Vicky for inviting me and for all the organizational work. And what I'd like to talk about today is, again, a kind of case study from the sort of what we might think of as the files of the Chinese esoteric Buddhist manuscripts from Dunhuang that have to do with tantric ritual. And today I've sort of singled out one set of texts and a set of problems, which I'm going to talk about as related to the 5 Buddha consecration. And I'm going to start with a little sort of refresher course on where I think the state of Dunhuang studies is in relation to the Chinese esoteric Buddhist manuscripts. So I'm going to read a little bit from my PowerPoint. So when we talk about the Dunhuang manuscript matrix, a lot of developments have happened in the past 15 years. So although the Dunhuang collection contains upwards of 60,000 individual manuscripts, including many fragments, spanning some 7 centuries, the bulk of Dunhuang documents date to the 9th and 10th centuries. This includes a large number of Chinese and Tibetan esoteric or tantric ritual manuscripts that circulated in the second half of the 10th century specifically. So this is important because the timeline for the Tibetan manuscripts has really kind of radically changed with scholarship over the past decade in particular. So we now no longer automatically assume that Tibetan documents from Dunhuang date to the Tibetan administrative period. And also the sort of timeline for Dunhuang as a whole has shifted. So we can talk again about the 7 centuries that are represented in the Dunhuang manuscripts. But really, if we want to be careful, the collection is primarily a Jun period collection. So that's a significant difference in sort of framing the collection as a whole. So the bulk of these late 10th century Buddhist manuscripts, and here I'm talking about documents that date from the 970s, 980s, and the 990s in particular, contain study and practice materials, so source books, personal notebooks, ritual manuals, sadhana texts that circulated in unique book formats like the Poti and Concertina booklets, and that traveled as ritual miscellanies or ritual miscellanies in composite manuscripts outside the official canons. So this study and practice material reflects multiple stages in the development of Buddhist Tantra or competing tantric ritual systems, sometimes on a single manuscript, and sometimes in more than one language. So the systematic study of the late 10th century materials as a group allows for a better understanding of regional Dunhuang Buddhism during the later Jun period, and it also enables us to read site-specific textual and ritual trends against trends elsewhere in pre-modern Buddhist Asia. So if we think about Dunhuang and the dissemination of Buddhist Tantra, we can say quite a bit. So within the manuscript cache, we find several constellations of works composed in Chinese that have been classified by modern scholars as esoteric Buddhist works. Here, we must accept the need for a critical genealogy of this phrase, esoteric Buddhism, but hopefully we can draw that out over the course of the weekend. Now, when we talk specifically about works at the site attributed to Amoghavajra, or what we could just simply call Amoghavajra's Dunhuang corpus, this includes a number of works concerned with esoteric initiation and empowerment rites. And there's 2 main categories of texts here. So works attributed to Amoghavajra that were canonical and extra-canonical, that are derivative of the Yoga Tantra class of scriptures. And this would include some indigenous or hybrid Chinese ritual works, so these sort of highly signified Yoga Tantra derivative works. Okay? And there's a second body of material that's often attributed to Amoghavajra, but in some cases these are anonymous works, that are non-transmitted or extra-canonical works falling outside the teachings, these are not attributed to Amoghavajra, works falling outside that rubric. And these include texts that appear to belong to what we might call these higher tantric classes of scripture that gain little traction in central Chinese Buddhist circles, but which seem to have gained at least some traction at Dunhuang. So we have works attributed to Amoghavajra that include both canonical and extra-canonical works, and then we have other bodies of material that look like they belong to another transmission lineage. So Dunhuang was a site, as you know, marked by complex interactions between different local Buddhist communities. Again, however we choose to conceptualize that complexity or those differences. This included Chinese and Tibetan-speaking communities, as well as what we might call cultural intermediaries, who were clearly reading and writing and possibly practicing across imagined ethnic and linguistic divides. When we read the Chinese and Tibetan esoteric or tantric works as a group, right, so if we stop isolating the Chinese manuscripts and the Tibetan manuscripts, we see common conventions and clear patterns. We have Chan, Yoga, and Mahayoga tantric works being transmitted in both languages, including texts that were transmitted or translated from Chinese to Tibetan and from Tibetan to Chinese. This scholarly practice, sort of laying everything out on the table and looking at it as a whole, allows for the comparative study of tantric ritual systems, which is something that I'm interested in doing, as well as the history of their circulation and appropriation or alteration at different times and different places. So I'm going to show you 2 case studies and then present a third here, and that's what's the beginnings of which are represented in the paper that I circulated for this conference. And these are case studies in Chinese Buddhist works at Dunhuang with known Tibetan parallels. Now the stronger way to say this is these are Chinese works derivative from or directly translated from Tibetan tantric works at Dunhuang. Okay? So the first case study, I don't know if you can see this on this manuscript. This is a Poti booklet, this is a stitch booklet that has Khotanese, Chinese, and Tibetan works on it. So it's a composite manuscript, P3861. And the third item here contains a Chinese text called the 28 Vajra Precepts. So again, the strong thesis here is that this is a Chinese text translated from known Tibetan parallels of the site, which we could classify as the 28 Samaya, or an early version of a later Nyingma Samaya code. Okay, so here you have a Chinese text, the only parallels for which are these early Nyingma Samaya texts. Okay, and many of these Samaya texts have been classified by Jin'gangding and others. A second case study that I've come across, and one that I'm working on currently, is a set of texts that we might simply just call Vajragarbha practice texts. Now in Chinese, Jin'gangding Pusa, there's a lot of overlap between this name and Vajrasattva and the heritage going back to Vajrapani, so it's all very interesting and complicated. Vajragarbha as a deity shows up in Hua Jing. He shows up in all the major tantric scriptures as well, so there's a very interesting sort of biography of this figure, and again, relationships between Vajragarbha and Vajrasattva. So I found a couple of copies of a 5-part sadhana text that the closest parallel to which we have are, again, some Tibetan Mahayoga works at this site. Okay? And you can see this sort of unique layout for these, and so all sorts of interesting questions rise up about who is producing and possibly using these manuscripts. Okay? Now, if we step back a bit more and we go back to that first category of Chinese esoteric manuscripts from Dunhuang that include works attributed to Amoghavajra, we see a kind of real clear interest at the site in this 5-Buddha consecration, which, as you know, is part of the mandala initiation most closely associated with the Vajradhatu mandala stemming from the STTS, the Jin'gangding, or the Sarva Tathagata Tattva Samgraha. And this is just the sort of Chinese root text that we're talking about, again, Amoghavajra's translation of chapter 1 or part 1 of the STTS. And then we have a series of really interesting and understudied, underexplored liturgical manuals belonging to the STTS lineage in China. And these 2 manuals in particular, which are called the recitation manuals, Nian Song, have an interesting provenance that's not completely understood, but they were taken to Japan and they do play a really vital part, as I understand it, in Kukai's development of the Juhachido, what comes to be called the Juhachido system of the later Shingon tradition. So you have the root text, and then you have these kind of core liturgical manuals that are going to allow you to put the practice into play. Right? And we have several copies and different recensions of these twin recitation manuals at Dunhuang. Okay? So this is sort of Amoghavajra canonical yoga tantra stuff. Okay? And again, here's just one of the examples of one of the twin recitation manuals from Dunhuang. And you might notice that all of these manuscripts attributed to Amoghavajra, and also the ones I'm identifying as Chinese works potentially derivative of Tibetan manuscripts have the same set of reading marks and ornamental marks as well. So there's some cosmological evidence for dating all of this stuff to the late 10th century. And we also have some explicit dated colophons as well. So again, we have this kind of preoccupation in the Chinese esoteric Buddhist materials at Dunhuang with the 5 Buddha consecration, which brings us to this discussion of Vairochana Buddha and the 5 Buddha families at Dunhuang. There's been now a lot of documentation of the cult of Vairochana at Dunhuang, and this takes us into conversations about the Tibetan cult of Vairochana, as well as the Chinese cult of Vairochana, and the 5 Buddha families. So this is sort of an integral conversation to have about the formation of the Yoga Tantra system itself and how it gets played out in different regional settings. So just to recap, as is well known, the 5 Buddhas refer to the 5 central deities occupying the central mandala of several tantras, including the STTF. Again, the 5 Buddhas of the Vajradhatu mandala are, of course, Vairochana, Akshobhya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, and Aloka Siddhi. So this is an interesting point. A standard colored directional scheme developed based on the Vajradhatu mandala presented in the STTS, but regional variations are known of that colored directional scheme, including at least one prominent alternate scheme documented at Dunhuang. So here, what I'm really talking about is this 5 Buddha scheme. These are well-known portable 5 paintings from Dunhuang. They have been discussed quite extensively in secondary scholarship. But what I want to point out, and it might be hard to see here in this room, is the color scheme. So I don't know if you can see Vairochana there at the center, but he is yellow. And Ratnasambhava here is white. And so that's the color alteration that you see in the later tradition or the canonical tradition, or what we call the Indo-Tibetan tradition. The central deity is usually white. Okay, so whether we want to call this a Chinese innovation, or we want to talk about this as like a local Dunhuang innovation, this is the color scheme that we see most often at Dunhuang, where the central Buddha, Vairochana, is yellow, and Ratnasambhava becomes white. Okay, and you can see it here again. Although again, I'm not sure you can see it too closely.
Sorry, Amanda, can you just speak into the mic so people are like that one? Sorry.
So one of the places that we see this 5 Buddha scheme and this 5 Buddha consecration getting worked out in the Dunhuang manuscripts is in a text that Ho Chong has edited and created an edition for called the Tangfa Yinzi. And this manuscript is known in 3 copies at the site, 1 complete, 2 partial. And it's really a Chinese Buddhist compendium of roughly 3 dozen mandala rites that contain a composite chronicle that outlines the transmission lineage of the text itself. And this includes several accounts of esoteric initiation ceremonies that feature a 5 Buddha crown. So I translated one short section from this text in a circulated paper, and it gives you this nice account of the king who ascends a platform, which is called a Vajradhatu mandala, and he goes through a series of steps, wearing the 5 Buddha crown, receives consecration, and the rite concludes. Okay? So we have many examples of that within this compendium. Now, just to make things more complicated, of course, this Dunhuang manuscript is circulated in at least 2 known recensions, the first of which we'll call the Tangfa Yinzi, and the second I'm calling the supplementary manual. Again, Ho Chong has transcribed and published an edition of this second recension, the supplementary manual, which contains all of the iconographical information you need to know to establish the mandala. So where the Tangfa Yinzi gives you a narrative and a ritual description, the supplementary manual gives you all the iconographical details for all of the deities in each mandala rite itself. So that's why I call it a supplementary manual. Now, we not only have texts like the one I just described, where we get narrative descriptions and then iconographical guides for how to actually create all of the deities in the mandala, but we have some ritual paraphernalia from the site. And this includes this 5 Buddha crown, now held at the Musée Guimet. And again, hopefully you can see, although this is even less clear, this is the sort of local Dunhuang color scheme. So the central Buddha here, Vairochana, is yellow. And we move this way around. So we have here Akshobhya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, and Amoga Siddhi. And this is actually life-size, so I blew it up to proper dimensions and made my son try it on. He loved that. It actually fits a head. And there's actually a lot of evidence that people wore it. It has a felt band around the back, which could be tied, and there's holes in the corners, so it looks like somebody could have worn this. Although, given the quality of the paper things, it's so not entirely clear it was actually used. But so we have many examples. Again, we have textual examples, and we have some actual, what look like paraphernalia items of this 5 Buddha crown with this same color directional scheme. Now, in addition to these types of sources, and this is the real point of the paper that I'll be preparing here, we have a visualization of a 5 Buddha crown that's also documented at the site. And this is one that I think might constitute a third case study in works that were translated into Chinese from local Tibetan works. And this is the manuscript I showed at the beginning that has that, what we'll just call simply and anachronistically, the 28 Nyingma Samaya vows. Later in the manuscript, we have a 5 Buddha contemplation practice, and so that's what I want to focus on here. And also, Ho Chong has transcribed this. It's also in his paper as part of his panel, and I provided a preliminary translation in my circulated paper as well. So again, this manuscript itself is fascinating, and again, the reading marks that I pointed out on one of the recitation manuals is also to be found on this manuscript that has very distinct punctuation. So there's all sorts of codicological reasons to connect these pieces together. So we don't have to go into all of these details. Again, it's found in the paper. But basically, what we have is a kind of two-part rite, the first of which is read. Next are the mantras for contemplating the 5 Tathagatas, and this is pretty standard stuff. We have Vairochana, Akshovya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, Amoga Siddhi. And this is followed by a short explanatory section, which says, practitioners entering the great vehicle should contemplate this body seal, which is the body of the Buddha. Do not let yourself become distracted, you will rapidly attain Buddhahood. So this all seems very kosher, this all seems very Yoga Tantra-like, Amoghavaja-like. And this is then followed on the manuscript by another sequence, which again we could pull out and talk about as a 5 Buddha crown. This time, not an actual crown worn in a ceremony, but a crown to be visualized, probably through the use of mantras and mudras, around the head of the practitioner. Okay? So I'll just read through this very quickly. It says, Vairochana Buddha appears on the crown of the head, white. Akshobhya Buddha appears at the forehead, blue. So you can imagine doing the mudra around the head. Ratnasambhava appears on the right side of the head, and it's yellow. Amitabha is at the back, red. And Amoga Siddhi is on the left, green. So this is not the Dunhuang color scheme, because the central Buddha Vairochana is white, and we have Ratnasambhava here is yellow. So this is non-standard amongst the sort of what appear to be locally produced Dunhuang material. So this is coming in from someplace else, okay? And we have it here again in Chinese. So where does this color directional scheme come from? We'll make some speculations. Even more interesting, this text continues. So we've got the 5 Buddhas and the mantra, and the locations around the head to create the visualized crown. Then we have the introduction of the 4 goddesses, Lochana, Mamaki, Pandaravasani, and Taradevi, with these color schemes. And in addition to each of these 4 goddesses, they have a sort of secondary deity or a paired deity who comes along with them. So with Lochana, we have what's called Ditsang Pusa, and then interlinear note that says, this deity should be placed at the stomach, which is very strange, or not, as it turns out. Then we have Mamaki, who's paired with water matrix bodhisattva, and we have other places or elements of the body listed for all 4. So there's these 4 pairs of deities associated with different parts of the body. Next, this text continues with deities personifying the 6 sense organs and the 6 sense objects, which are listed, and I'll just give you the first here to keep things short. The eyes are Rupa Vajri, and that deity is paired with this deity named Sa Pusa, or form bodhisattva. And then you get a set of 6 there. And then finally, the last set on this manuscript, we see the 4 Dharmapalas, paired with the 4 Vajra deities, personifying the 4 qualities of the Bodhisattva mind. So we have Yamantika to the east, in superscript, and it's really important to note that on the manuscript itself, all of these sort of paired deities appear in superscript, so smaller font. Vajra, great kindness. Now, these deities that appear in superscript, sort of the second pair of these sort of canonical deities, appear in many, many different Dunhuang manuscripts, Chinese manuscripts at the site. And so, who exactly these deities are, we don't know outside the site, but within the site they make quite a bit of sense. Okay? And this text ends with the following: one by one, arrange these deities at the proper places on the body. Do not allow distractions to obscure your vision of them. So they are to be placed in different points on the body. Now, why is this count as part of this experiment? To sort of think with specific examples from Dunhuang about the possibility of material coming into the Chinese esoteric corpus of the site from Tibetan rather than from central China or other places, because we have parallel documentation again. So IOL tip J576 is an example of a text that could have served as the source text for our Chinese Buddha crown meditation. And IOL tip J576 has been identified as what we might call a proto-body mandala. Okay, we can play around with why we do or do not want to continue to use the word proto, but it's been identified by Dalton and Skyke in their catalog of the Tibetan tantric materials from Dunhuang as comprised of 5 texts that represent an extended ritual manual for initiation practices derivative of the Yoga Tantras. And the first text on the manuscript describes how the practitioner is empowered with mantras and practices of the Vajradhatu mandala specifically. And Ray Dashiel, in her 2015 dissertation, describes this first text of this sequence of 5 on the manuscript as mapping the deities of the Vajradhatu mandala onto points on the surface of the human body, again suggesting that it represents a proto-body mandala, by which I think she means this is pre-Guhya Samaja stuff, so this is, within the Yoga Tantra scheme, you've got something that looks like a body mandala, so it's sort of anachronistic in that sense, according to kind of the traditional story of how these things unfold. So when compared to the later Guhya Samaja body mandala, the mode of mapping found on IOL tip J576 is far from standardized, suggesting we are looking at an experimental or transitional phase in the evolution of such practices. And this is exactly what our Chinese text looks like too. It doesn't look like canonical Chinese material. It doesn't necessarily look exactly like works that could have been derivative of the Guhya Samaja in Chinese. It looks a lot like these local experiments that we also have documented in Tibetan at the site. So just some final reflections. As we all here know, too little scholarly attention has been paid to Buddhist ritual genres in general. The Dunhuang samples constitute the most comprehensive collection of excellent tantric ritual manuscripts outside of Japan. Focus on the distinctive codicology and paleographical features of our Dunhuang samples reveal clusters or groups of ritual materials that aid greatly in their identification and dating. So cross or transcultural transmission includes movement in multiple directions across traditions or systems, Chan Tantra, and languages, Chinese and Tibetan. In some, these ritual manuscripts have the potential to speak to the circulation histories and possible functions of individual manuscripts, the sociological background of those responsible for their production, circulation, and possible consumption, as well as regional and trans-regional trends in the development of tantric Buddhist ritual systems. Thank you.